The city of Florence is settling into a deep indigo shadow. The year is 1429. Outside the heavy oak doors of a Florentine counting house, the cobblestones glisten beneath a light evening mist. The Arno River flows silently nearby, carrying with it the secrets of 1,000 merchants. Fortunes made, fortunes lost, and fortunes quietly promised. Tonight, the world of modern commerce is sleeping, but its heart, the ledger, is wide awake. You are safe here, tucked away from the noise of the modern world, surrounded by the scent of old paper and beeswax, by candlelight and whispered calculations. This is not a place of shouting crowds or clashing steel. This is a room where power is written softly, line by line, in ink. We often think of power as something won with swords or declared from a throne. But in the Renaissance, a different kind of power was quietly gathering in the corners of dark rooms like this one. A power made not of armies, but of trust, of credit, of debt. The Medici family did not begin as kings. They were men of numbers. Yet these same men would go on to fund the greatest artists humanity has ever known, place their blood upon the papal throne, and shape the fate of empires, all by mastering the silent language of money. Tonight, we trace the rise of the House of Medici, the bankers who whispered to the world, until the world whispered back. But before we follow the gold into the vaults of history, take a moment to settle into your own space. Adjust your pillow. Feel the weight of your shoulders sinking into the mattress. There is nothing you need to solve tonight. No ledgers for you to balance. No debts for you to pay. As I speak, let the details of this story drift over you like a slow-moving tide. If your mind wanders, let it. If your eyes close, let them. We are going back to a time of candlelight and silent hallways, to a world where wealth moved quietly, and where the modern financial system was first imagined. There exists in the annals of Western civilization a single family whose influence rivals that of emperors and popes, yet whose power derived not from armies or divine mandate, but from something far more enduring, the absolute mastery of money itself. The Medici did not conquer territory through force. They did not inherit their dominion through ancient bloodlines. Instead, across 2.5 centuries of European history, they constructed an empire built entirely on ledgers, loans, and the precise deployment of capital at the moments when kings and kingdoms found themselves most desperate. What makes their story especially relevant today is not merely the scale of their wealth, nor the longevity of their influence, but the architectural blueprint they established for how financial power operates and ultimately supersedes political authority. Every mechanism we recognize in modern global finance, central banking, sovereign debt, currency manipulation, the interweaving of private banking interests with state treasuries, the use of cultural patronage to legitimize commercial power, finds its prototype in the counting houses and palaces of Florence between 1397 and 1743. The Medici were not the first bankers in Europe, nor were they the wealthiest merchants when they began. What set them apart was their intuitive understanding of a principle that would not be formally named for centuries, that in a world of cash-starved monarchs, endless wars, and fragile economies, the extension of credit transforms the lender into a shadow sovereign. By the time the last Medici died without an heir, this Florentine banking family had produced 4 popes, married into nearly every royal house in Europe, financed the Renaissance itself, and established financial political patterns that would echo through the Rothschilds, the Federal Reserve, the International Monetary Fund, and the modern architecture of sovereign debt. To study the Medici is to witness the birth of the modern financial system in its purest and least disguised form, before the machinery of money disappeared behind complexity, institutions, and bureaucracy. Here, in the quiet, by candlelight, where power first learned to whisper.
When we look out across the landscape of global power today, the outlines of authority appear familiar, yet subtly transformed. In the year 2025, nations still possess armies. They still command resources, populations, and territory. Flags still rise, anthems still play. But beneath these visible symbols of strength, another system quietly sets the boundaries of what power can actually do. Even states armed with nuclear weapons now find their options narrowed, not by enemies, but by numbers, by debt ratios, by interest rates, by the silent expectations of credit markets. Vast countries, rich in land and people, discover that their freedom to act depends less on geography than on continued access to dollar-denominated finance. We are told that the modern international order rests on treaties and institutions born after the Second World War. And in form, this is true, but in function, power no longer flows from councils or charters alone. It moves through quieter channels, through central banks, sovereign bond markets, currency swap lines, and the private financial institutions that stand between governments and the money they require to survive. This world did not emerge suddenly. It was not designed in a single moment of theory or foresight. It evolved slowly, through crises, improvisation, and repetition, through centuries of trial and error. And many of its most enduring rules were first written not in Washington or London, but in Renaissance Florence. The Medici learned something fundamental, that when a state is weakest, when war drains its treasury, when famine looms, when legitimacy falters, that is when credit becomes decisive. To extend it is to gain influence. To withhold it is to command obedience. In such moments, the lender acquires an authority more enduring than conquest, because it embeds itself inside the machinery of governance itself. Understanding this model becomes especially urgent in our own time. Global debt now stretches into the hundreds of trillions. Central bank balance sheets rival the size of entire national economies. Governments borrow not just to grow, but simply to function, often under conditions that quietly limit their political choices. And a small constellation of financial institutions possesses what amounts to a silent veto over fiscal futures.
These are not malfunctions of the modern system. They are its design, and that design traces back to Florence. The Medici did not invent money, nor were they the first to lend it. What they pioneered was something far more subtle: the transformation of banking from a commercial service into a governing force. They built relationships of dependency with political power. They wrapped finance in culture, patronage, and legitimacy. They understood that art, architecture, and reputation could stabilize credit just as effectively as gold. Every system that followed, the founding of the Bank of England, the creation of the Federal Reserve, the emergency powers assumed by central banks during modern crises, represents not a departure from this model, but its refinement. The techniques have grown more complex, the language more technical, the rooms more distant from candlelight, but the principle remains unchanged. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply balances the books and decides who may borrow tomorrow. To understand how a family of Florentine cloth merchants and money changers came to rule Europe without crowns or armies, we must first return to the world they inherited. 14th century Italy was not a nation, it was a mosaic, a scattering of city-states, papal lands, feuding republics, southern kingdoms, and territories loosely claimed by the Holy Roman Empire, each in constant competition, each forever short of money, and each periodically at war. Borders shifted, alliances dissolved, commerce flowed faster than law could follow. Florence sat at the center of this turbulence. On paper, it was a republic. Officials were elected. Guilds governed civic life. Power was said to belong to the people. But beneath these forms, authority rested quietly in the hands of a few dozen families, men whose wealth came not from land or titles, but from wool, cloth, and the increasingly complex business of moving money across distance and time. Florence possessed no great mines, no vast farmlands. Its advantage was expertise. Its merchants mastered currency exchange in a world without standardized money. They extended credit across borders where coins changed value from city to city. They kept accounts that could track obligations over months and years. In doing so, Florence became one of Europe's financial hearts, beating steadily beneath the noise of politics and war. The moment that opened the door for the Medici came not from their own ambition, but from catastrophe. In the 1440s, Florence's two most powerful banking houses, the Bardi and the Peruzzi, collapsed almost simultaneously. Both had wagered their fortunes on a single client, Edward III of England. To finance his wars, conflicts that would later be known as the 100 Years' War, Edward borrowed enormous sums from Florentine bankers. Then, as kings could do, he simply refused to repay. The losses were total. The banks failed, Florence convulsed, and an unmistakable lesson spread through the city. Lending to sovereigns promised enormous reward, but carried the risk of sudden annihilation. Most banking families retreated. They turned away from monarchs. They sought safety. One family did not. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici reached a different conclusion. The danger, he realized, was not lending to rulers, it was lending without protection. The failure lay not in credit itself, but in the structure of dependence surrounding it.
In 1397, Giovanni founded the Medici Bank. But its brilliance was not technical. Florence already possessed skilled accountants and financiers. Giovanni's innovation was architectural. Rather than building a single institution that could collapse with one default, he created a network. Semi-independent branches spread across Europe: Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, London, each with its own partners, its own books, its own capital. If one branch failed, the others would endure. 5 centuries before modern finance named the concept, Giovanni had discovered diversification of political risk. But even this was only part of the design. Giovanni focused the bank's strength on a client whose failure to pay was unthinkable: the papacy. The medieval church was not merely a spiritual authority. It was the largest financial organism in Europe. Money flowed into Rome from every corner of Christendom: tithes, donations, fees, creating constant needs for exchange, storage, and short-term credit. Yet the church faced a problem: usury, charging interest, was forbidden. The Medici solved this quietly. Interest was embedded within exchange rates. Fees replaced loans. The letter of church law was honored, while its economic spirit was gently bypassed. In return, the Medici became indispensable. A king could default. The church could not. To admit insolvency would be to confess weakness, not merely financial, but spiritual. And so the Medici secured a borrower bound not by contracts, but by theology itself. When Giovanni's son Cosimo de' Medici assumed control of the bank in 1429, this financial relationship became something deeper. Within a few years, Cosimo exercised effective control over papal finances, and through them, quiet influence over papal decisions. By 1434, Cosimo was the most powerful man in Florence. Officially, nothing had changed. Florence remained a republic. Cosimo held no crown. He rarely occupied formal office. Yet the machinery of government moved according to his will. This was financial power in its purest form. Cosimo did not abolish institutions, he captured them economically. Officials owed him money. Merchants depended on his credit. Political careers were quietly financed by Medici capital. When rivals exiled him in 1433, they discovered within a year that Florence could not function without him. Credit tightened, support evaporated. Cosimo returned. His enemies departed instead. The lesson was unmistakable. Political authority follows control of capital, not titles. But Cosimo understood something even subtler. Money alone provokes resentment. Power without legitimacy invites rebellion. So Cosimo transformed wealth into beauty. He rebuilt churches. He endowed monasteries. He collected books and opened his library to scholars. He patronized artists, architects, philosophers, turning Florence into the intellectual heart of the Renaissance. In doing so, he changed the meaning of his fortune. The banker became a benefactor. The lender became a patron. The accumulator of profit became the guardian of culture. This was not generosity, it was strategy. Financial capital was converted into social trust. Political influence was wrapped in art, learning, and devotion.
and the Medici name became inseparable from civic virtue itself. The pattern would repeat across centuries, through the Rothschilds, through industrial philanthropists, through foundations and endowments bearing the names of financial empires. It all began here, in Florence, by candlelight, where money learned not only how to rule, but how to be loved.
The way the Medici transformed banking profit into political command can be seen most clearly in moments where money and authority briefly touched and then quietly merged. One such moment came in 1458. That year, a learned diplomat and cleric named Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini was elevated to the papal throne, becoming Pope Pius II. His election was not an accident of theology or chance. Piccolomini had long been a client of the way the Medici transformed banking profit into political command can be seen most clearly in moments where money and authority briefly touched and then quietly merged. One such moment came in 1458. That year, a learned diplomat and cleric named Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini was elevated to the papal throne, becoming Pope Pius II. His election was not an accident of theology or chance. Piccolomini had long been a client of the Medici Bank, and Cosimo de' Medici's influence smoothed the path to his ascension. With Pius II in Rome, the Medici secured something more valuable than favor. They secured continuity, continued access to the financial arteries of the Church. But the relationship went deeper than routine banking. Soon after his election, Pope Pius II announced an ambitious vision, a renewed crusade against the Ottoman Empire. Such an undertaking required vast sums, ships, soldiers, provisions, diplomacy across Europe. Spirit alone could not finance it. The only way the project could even be imagined was through credit, and it was Medici credit that made the planning possible. The crusade itself never materialized. Europe was too divided, support too thin. Yet the episode revealed a deeper truth about power in the Renaissance world. Popes could proclaim grand visions, kings could announce glorious campaigns, but whether these ideas ever left parchment depended on the willingness of bankers to advance the funds. The Medici did not shape doctrine, they did not define faith, but they quietly determined what could be done in the world beyond sermons and symbols. This same pattern repeated itself far beyond Rome. Across Europe, Medici branches extended credit to monarchs, but never blindly, never on trust alone. Each loan was carefully structured to reduce the possibility of defiance. When Edward IV of England required funds, Medici loans were secured not by royal promises, but by direct access to customs revenues from English wool exports. Repayment flowed automatically from trade itself, through channels the bank could observe and control. When Charles the Bold of Burgundy sought financing for his military ambitions, Medici credit arrived bound to commercial privileges that expanded the bank's operations within Burgundian lands. The principle was unwavering: never rely on goodwill where systems can be built. Never depend on honor when mechanisms can enforce obedience. Modern finance follows the same logic.
When institutions like the International Monetary Fund lend to nations in crisis, the money arrives accompanied by conditions, budget constraints, policy reforms, monitoring requirements. These are not innovations of the 20th century. They are refinements of a model perfected in Florence. The height of Medici influence arrived under Lorenzo de' Medici, known to history as Il Magnifico. When Lorenzo assumed leadership of the family in 1469, he was only 20 years old. Yet under his rule, the Medici system reached its fullest expression. Lorenzo was simultaneously banker and diplomat, poet and philosopher, political strategist and cultural architect. Florence flourished. Leonardo da Vinci worked under Medici patronage. Botticelli painted his most enduring works. Michelangelo received his early training within the Medici household itself. The city became the cultural capital of Europe. But beneath this flowering of art and intellect lay a formidable financial machine. During Lorenzo's tenure, the Medici Bank functioned less like a private enterprise and more like a proto-central bank for Italy, coordinating credit between city-states, mediating financial disputes, stabilizing currencies, and serving as intermediary for the papacy, multiple duchies, and the Kingdom of Naples. Lorenzo understood something essential about power, that war is expensive, not only in lives, but in balance sheets. Renaissance Italy existed in a state of perpetual tension. Milan, Venice, Florence, Rome, and Naples competed constantly for influence and territory. Traditional logic would suggest inevitable war. Lorenzo chose another path. Through what later historians would call a diplomacy of the purse, he extended credit to multiple rivals simultaneously. He entangled their financial interests with one another. He made Florence's stability economically essential to the system as a whole. In doing so, he created a quiet deterrent. War would not merely be destructive, it would be financially catastrophic for everyone involved. Credit, once again, served as restraint. This delicate equilibrium endured for as long as Lorenzo lived. When he died in 1492, the balance collapsed almost immediately. That same year marked the end of the Spanish Reconquista, the opening of the Atlantic world through Columbus's voyage, and soon after, the beginning of French invasions into Italy, conflicts that would plunge the peninsula into decades of warfare. Trade routes fractured, sovereigns defaulted, armies marched. By 1494, the Medici Bank, so carefully constructed for stability, could not withstand the return of large-scale war. Branches failed, capital evaporated, the network dissolved. The Medici were expelled from Florence itself, and yet their power did not disappear. This is where the true nature of financial power reveals itself. A merchant family that loses its trade is finished. An industrial dynasty whose factories burn is ruined. But a banking family that has spent generations converting money into relationships, into marriages, into institutions, and into legitimacy can survive the collapse of the bank itself. The Medici had already embedded themselves everywhere that mattered. By 1512, they returned to Florence not as bankers, but as political rulers. In 1513, Giovanni de' Medici ascended the papal throne as Pope Leo X. A decade later, his cousin Giulio followed as Pope Clement VII. The transformation was complete. The Medici had begun as merchants. They became bankers. They ended as sovereigns. Their story demonstrates a final, enduring lesson. When financial power is cultivated patiently and converted wisely, it can outlive the institutions that created it and reshape history long after the ledgers have closed.
To understand why the Medici model endured and why its logic still governs modern finance, we must look not at personalities, but at a quiet imbalance built into the nature of government itself. From medieval kingdoms to modern states, rulers have faced the same problem. Money comes in slowly, but it is needed all at once. Taxes arrive after harvests. Customs duties depend on ships, weather, and trade. Revenue flows in uneven streams, predictable in theory, uncertain in practice. Yet the demands of power arrive suddenly. Armies must be paid immediately. Grain must be purchased before famine spreads. Succession disputes, rebellions, and wars do not wait for the next fiscal cycle. This mismatch between gradual income and urgent expense is the hidden engine of credit. A king who needs soldiers today cannot wait for next year's taxes. He must borrow, and he must borrow from whoever already has money gathered, counted, and ready. In the medieval and Renaissance world, this meant turning to a small class of merchants and bankers, men who had accumulated liquid capital through trade and who could move it quickly across borders. The Medici understood that this dependence gave lenders a kind of power that far exceeded their apparent wealth. In theory, a ruler could seize a banker's assets. In practice, doing so would be disastrous. A sovereign who confiscated instead of repaid would find himself cut off from future credit. Other lenders would vanish. Wars would become impossible to finance. Authority itself would weaken. And so the system rested on a delicate balance. Rulers needed credibility to borrow. Bankers needed structures that made default more painful than repayment. The Medici refined this balance into a science. They did not place all their fortunes in the hands of a single monarch. Sovereign lending was spread across multiple clients, across regions and courts, ensuring that one failure would not bring down the whole system. Wherever possible, loans were secured not by promises, but by mechanisms, specific revenue streams, customs duties, commercial privileges. Repayment was designed to occur automatically through channels the bank could observe and influence. But their most important insight went even further. The Medici did not merely lend money, they became infrastructure. For the papacy especially, the Medici Bank did not simply provide credit, it managed currency exchange, coordinated revenue collection from across Europe, and transferred funds between regions that used entirely different monetary systems. Once a client's entire financial life ran through Medici channels, leaving became nearly impossible. Switching banks meant rebuilding an entire operational system from scratch. This is why certain institutions today are described as too big to fail. Once a bank becomes embedded in the basic plumbing of finance, its collapse threatens everyone connected to it, and that threat becomes a form of protection. The Medici also grasped something more subtle, something economics would not formally describe for centuries.
In a world short of gold and silver, credit itself becomes money. 15th century Europe simply did not possess enough coin to support the volume of trade taking place. As a result, most commerce occurred without physical money ever changing hands. Bills of exchange, ledger entries, deferred payments. A Medici banker in Rome could issue a promise payable in London, and that promise would circulate, used in transactions, trusted, passed along, long before anyone demanded coin. The Medici were not just moving money, they were creating it. Their credit instruments functioned as a private currency, backed not by metal, but by reputation. As long as confidence held, most of this money would never need to be redeemed. Modern banking operates on the same principle. Loans create deposits, deposits circulate. Only a fraction ever becomes physical cash. The system works not because everyone can withdraw at once, but because they believe they won't need to. And this belief is the system's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. A bank perceived as stable can operate with remarkably small reserves. Confidence does the rest of the work. But once doubt spreads, once people begin asking not whether the money exists, but where it is, the entire structure trembles. This is what happened to the Medici Bank in the 1490s. War shattered trade routes, sovereigns defaulted, confidence evaporated, debtors delayed payment, creditors demanded settlement. Promises that once circulated effortlessly were suddenly called in. The assets still existed, but liquidity vanished. The Medici network, designed for stability, could not withstand a sudden universal demand for repayment, and so it collapsed. The pattern is familiar. It reappears in modern times during the banking panics of the 19th century, the collapse of major institutions in 2008, the sovereign debt crises that ripple through economies when trust disappears. The names change, the instruments evolve, the rooms grow quieter and more abstract, but the mechanism remains the same. Finance is not powered by gold alone, it is powered by belief. And those who understand how belief is built, maintained, and leveraged, like the Medici, do not merely participate in history, they quietly shape its limits. When we look at the architecture of global finance today through the lens of the Medici, the resemblance is impossible to ignore. The names have changed, the rooms are larger, the language is more technical, but the structure remains. Where Florence once relied on a single banking family, the modern world relies on institutions. Where personal relationships once bound bankers to popes and princes, today formal mandates and legal frameworks perform the same function. Yet the underlying dynamic, the control of access to credit, has not shifted. In Renaissance Florence, the Medici Bank occupied a position that was neither fully private nor fully public. It operated for profit, yet its decisions shaped public life, constrained political authority, and determined what governments could afford to do. Modern central banks now occupy this role. The Federal Reserve, established in 1913, is formally independent, yet it defines the monetary environment in which the American state operates. Its decisions influence employment, inflation, asset prices, and the cost of government borrowing. While elected officials debate policy, the central bank quietly determines the financial boundaries within which those debates can have real effect. In Europe, the authority is even more explicit. During the euro crisis, the European Central Bank imposed conditions on sovereign nations that would have been immediately recognizable to a Renaissance ruler. Adjust your fiscal behavior, restructure your finances, or lose access to credit and face collapse. The language is modern, the logic is ancient. The dependency that once bound popes and princes to Florentine bankers has simply expanded in scale. In 2025, the United States carries federal debt measured not in millions, but in tens of trillions of dollars. This debt must be constantly refinanced, rolled over through auctions of treasury securities. Should buyers fail to appear, the government would face immediate crisis, regardless of its military power or taxation authority. This reality grants immense influence to the network of creditors, central banks, institutional investors, and primary dealers who participate in sovereign debt markets. Their willingness to lend, or hesitation to do so, quietly disciplines fiscal behavior. When governments pursue policies creditors distrust, borrowing costs rise, interest rates climb. What was politically desirable becomes financially impossible. No banker needs to say no directly. The market answers instead. The Medici once constrained sovereigns by refusing loans. Modern systems achieve the same outcome through yields and spreads. The strategy of embedding financial power into essential infrastructure has also reached its fullest expression. Today's largest banks, institutions whose names rarely change, are not merely lenders. They are the backbone of global payments, currency exchange, derivatives markets, and international settlement systems. Their operations are so deeply woven into commerce that their failure would not remain contained. This reality became unmistakable in 2008. Governments around the world committed vast sums to prevent major bank collapses, not out of affection, but out of necessity. Allowing these institutions to fail would have frozen trade, credit, and payment systems simultaneously. The banks had achieved what the Medici once achieved in Florence. They had made themselves indispensable. Once an institution becomes essential to the system's operation, it acquires a form of protection. Losses are absorbed collectively. Stability becomes a public concern. Risk in moments of crisis is shared, while profits during stability remain private. And finally, there is legitimacy. The Medici understood that financial power alone invites hostility. To endure, it must be transformed, softened into something society values. Today, this takes the form of philanthropy, foundations, endowments, universities, medical research, cultural institutions bearing the names of financial empires. These efforts often produce real good. They fund discovery, alleviate suffering, expand knowledge. And yet they also perform another function. They convert wealth into moral authority. They reposition financiers as benefactors. They shift public focus from how capital is accumulated to how it is distributed afterward. Criticism becomes complicated. Opposition feels ungrateful. Power acquires a human face. This too is not new. Cosimo de' Medici built churches and libraries. Modern finance builds foundations and research institutes. The forms differ, the function is the same. The Medici did not design the modern world, but they revealed its operating logic early. And once seen clearly, that logic becomes difficult to unsee. Power no longer needs crowns. It does not march in armor. It rarely speaks at all. It simply ensures that credit continues to flow, or quietly reminds the world what happens when it does not. The deepest parallel between the world of the Medici and our own does not lie in any single institution, but in the shape of power itself. What emerged in Renaissance Florence and what has quietly matured in the modern era is a layered system of authority. One layer is visible, formal, and familiar. The other is quieter, more durable, and ultimately more decisive. In Florence, the Republic remained intact. Councils met, officials were elected, laws were debated and passed. Yet beneath these forms, real power resided elsewhere, within the Medici banking network, where decisions about credit determined which policies could be pursued and which ambitions quietly expired. In contemporary democracies, the pattern feels familiar. Elections are held, parliaments convene, constitutions remain untouched, and yet the practical scope of government action is bounded by forces that never appear on a ballot. Market confidence, credit ratings, interest rates, and the willingness of lenders to continue financing the state. A newly elected government may promise sweeping change, but almost immediately it encounters an invisible question: will the markets allow it? Budgets must still be financed, debt must still be rolled over, confidence must be maintained, and so policy is shaped not only by voters, but by creditors. This arrangement did not arise through secret meetings or grand conspiracies. It emerged logically, almost inevitably, from structural dependence. Governments that spend more than they collect must borrow. Borrowing creates obligations. Those who supply capital demand security, predictability, and return. Over time, these demands become a form of discipline, one more immediate and unforgiving than constitutional law. A government can violate a statute and survive for years. It cannot violate creditor confidence without consequence. The result is a system in which elected officials govern, but only within parameters they did not design and cannot easily escape. To challenge those boundaries is to risk currency collapse, capital flight, and economic shock. The institutions that enforce this discipline are powerful and curiously distant. Central banks, major commercial banks, sovereign wealth funds, credit rating agencies, international financial organizations. Together, they shape employment, inflation, asset values, and growth, yet they operate largely outside the rhythms of democratic accountability. Central bankers are appointed, not elected. Their terms span multiple political cycles. Their decisions affect millions of lives, yet they answer to mandates written in technical language, insulated from public pressure. The justification is practical, even persuasive. Monetary policy is complex. History offers many examples of governments destroying their currencies in moments of desperation or populist excess. Independence, we are told, is protection. And yet the consequence remains. Enormous power over daily life, jobs, prices, savings, housing, rests in the hands of officials who never face voters, guided by economic models that evolve, fracture, and sometimes fail. Nowhere is this quiet architecture more visible than in the Bank for International Settlements. Founded in 1930 and headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, the BIS serves as a bank for central banks. It provides a space where monetary authorities meet, coordinate, and align policies governing the global financial system. Its members are not states, but central banks. Its clients are not citizens, but institutions. Its meetings occur behind closed doors. Its deliberations are confidential. And yet the standards and agreements shaped within its walls ripple outward, affecting banking regulation, capital requirements, and monetary coordination across the world. Billions of people live within frameworks influenced by decisions made there. None of them vote on its leadership. The origins of the BIS are revealing. It was created to manage German reparations after the First World War, a technical solution to a financial problem born of political catastrophe. When the interwar monetary system collapsed, the institution did not vanish, it adapted. It survived depression, World War, decolonization, the Cold War, the collapse of Bretton Woods. Political orders rose and fell. The BIS endured. This persistence reveals something essential. Financial power does not require sovereignty to survive. It does not depend on flags or constitutions. It flows around political change and often outlasts it. The Medici understood this early. They ruled not by abolishing the Republic, but by rendering it secondary. Modern finance has followed the same path, leaving democratic forms intact while quietly relocating the center of gravity elsewhere. Power did not disappear, it simply changed levels. And like the ledger in a dark Florentine counting house, it continues to operate, patient, precise, and largely unseen. There came a moment when the Medici model reached the edge of its own success. By the 16th century, Europe had entered an age of war whose scale exceeded anything a single family could finance. Armies grew larger, campaigns stretched across continents. Conflicts no longer ended with a season or a treaty, but dragged on for decades. The French invasions of Italy, the wars between Habsburgs and Valois, the long struggle with the Ottoman Empire, the religious wars that followed the Reformation. Each demanded resources on a scale that no private banking house, no matter how wealthy, could sustain alone. The solution did not arrive all at once. It emerged slowly. Governments began to borrow not from one banker, but from many. Instead of negotiating privately with a family, they issued promises that could be purchased by anyone with surplus capital. Bonds replaced personal loans. Markets replaced relationships. Sovereign debt was born. This innovation solved the problem of scale. States could now raise sums far greater than the Medici ever commanded. But it also transformed the nature of financial power. Influence did not vanish, it dispersed. Power became less visible, more abstract. spread across markets rather than concentrated in names. The hand remained on the lever, but it was harder to see who pulled it. A decisive moment in this transition arrived in 1694 with the founding of the Bank of England. The bank was created for a single urgent purpose: to finance war. Structured as a private corporation, it loaned its capital directly to the government. In return, it received the right to issue banknotes and manage public debt. What the Medici had achieved informally, the Bank of England made permanent. A private financial institution became embedded at the heart of state finance, serving the government, yet also disciplining it through control of credit. The model proved powerful. France attempted similar arrangements. Other European states followed. Over time, the idea became standard. National banks, closely linked to governments, operating as the bridge between public authority and private capital. 2 centuries later, the United States created its own version. The Federal Reserve, established in 1913, formed a network of banks entrusted with currency creation, monetary policy, and the stabilization of government finance. Like its predecessors, it was neither fully public nor fully private, designed to operate independently, yet indispensable to the state. What makes this evolution so consequential is not the change in scale, but the preservation of the underlying logic. The Medici constrained popes by refusing loans. Modern central banks constrain governments by raising rates. In both cases, access to credit defines the boundaries of policy. The difference lies in appearance. When a Florentine banker said no, the political act was unmistakable. When a central bank adjusts interest rates or liquidity conditions, the decision appears technical, guided by models, mandates, and neutral expertise. Yet the effects are profound. Entire economies slow or accelerate. Governments are forced into restraint or expansion. Social consequences ripple outward, all without a single vote being cast. Power has not weakened, it has been disguised. This system intensified after the Second World War. The Bretton Woods agreements created permanent institutions to govern global finance, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Their mission was stability and development. Their method was credit. A country facing crisis, short of foreign currency, unable to pay its debts, turns to the IMF. Assistance arrives with conditions. Budgets must be cut, markets liberalized, state assets sold, policies reworded. This process, known as structural adjustment, is often described in technical terms, but its essence is ancient. Credit is exchanged for compliance. The scale has grown, the language has softened, the institutions are multinational rather than familial, but the model is unchanged. The IMF and World Bank are not deviations from the Medici system. They are its descendants, operating at global scale, backed by the world's most powerful states, enforcing the same fundamental bargain: access to money in exchange for influence. The Medici once proved that banking could rule without ruling openly. The modern world, simply perfected the technique.
In recent decades, this system has entered a new phase of acceleration through a process economists call financialization, the steady expansion of financial markets, financial actors, and financial logic into nearly every corner of economic life. The change is measurable. In 1980, the financial sector accounted for roughly 15% of total corporate profits in the United States. By 2020, that share had doubled, approaching 30%, despite the fact that finance produces no physical goods and employs only a small fraction of the workforce. The economy did not simply grow, it reoriented. Capital flowed away from manufacturing floors and service provision toward financial intermediation, asset management, derivatives trading, and speculative investment. Value increasingly came not from making things or providing services, but from positioning capital to extract returns from the circulation of money itself. The consequence is structural. As finance expands, a greater share of total economic returns accrues to those who control capital rather than those who contribute labor, manage firms, or produce tangible output. Wealth concentrates not where value is created, but where capital is allocated. This is the modern realization of the Medici insight. In an economy organized around debt, leverage, and credit expansion, the decisive power lies not with producers, but with those who govern the flow of money. Control the arteries, and the system delivers returns to you automatically. The events of 2008 exposed both the fragility and the durability of this arrangement. When the American housing bubble collapsed, financial institutions discovered that vast portions of their balance sheets were built on securities that could no longer be valued, traded, or trusted. Lehman Brothers failed. Others hovered on the brink of collapse. Credit markets froze. Global trade contracted. The world economy slid into its deepest crisis since the 1930s. What followed was unprecedented. Central banks intervened on a scale never before attempted. Trillions of dollars in financial assets were purchased through quantitative easing. Governments injected capital directly into banks. Interest rates were driven to near zero and held there for years. Liquidity was provided without limit. The system survived, but survival came at a cost. Public debt surged, central bank balance sheets ballooned, and the assumption that large financial institutions would be rescued in a crisis, once denied, became undeniable. The lesson was clear. The financial system had achieved the same position the Medici once held, but on a global scale. It had embedded itself so deeply into the functioning of the economy that allowing it to fail was no longer considered an option. Its collapse was not merely dangerous, it was politically impossible. Losses could be socialized. Stability would be preserved. The infrastructure of finance would be defended, regardless who paid the price. 5 centuries earlier, the Medici learned that true power lies not in ruling directly, but in becoming indispensable. Modern finance did not invent this principle. It perfected it.
The central truth that emerges from tracing the path from the Medici to the present is not simply that finance has accumulated power, but that once financial power is established, it becomes extraordinarily resistant to removal or reform. This is not because it is illegitimate, but because it is indispensable. Modern economies cannot function without credit markets to allocate capital. Governments cannot operate without borrowing because public revenues and public expenditures never arrive on the same timetable. Monetary systems cannot exist without some coordinating authority to manage currency, liquidity, and stability. These mechanisms are necessary. And yet, each of them concentrates authority in the hands of those who control access to credit. The result is the same structural dynamic the Medici first recognized 6 centuries ago, a system in which economic necessity quietly translates into political leverage, not through force or decree, but through dependency. The deeper revelation is not that bankers are uniquely malevolent or that financial institutions rule through secret coordination. It is that credit-based economies naturally produce concentrated financial power, regardless of the moral character of the individuals operating within them. This pattern has survived every transformation of the modern world. The Medici operated under monarchies and city-state republics. Modern finance operates under democracies, autocracies, and hybrid regimes. The Medici recorded transactions in handwritten ledgers. Today's markets move through fiber optic cables and algorithms executing trades in microseconds. The Medici knew nothing of corporations, central banks, or stock exchanges. Our world is built around them. And yet, the essential relationship endures. Creditors continue to constrain sovereigns. Financial infrastructure continues to become systemically indispensable. Accumulated wealth continues to convert into political influence. The form evolves, the function remains. This persistence suggests that the challenge is not merely one of regulation or institutional design, but something more fundamental embedded in the structure of credit-based systems themselves. Every major attempt to restrain financial power after the Great Depression, after repeated banking crises, after 2008, has eventually been weakened, bypassed, or rendered obsolete. Not always through corruption or conspiracy, but through the internal logic of the system. When economic activity depends on credit, those who control credit acquire power. When governments depend on borrowing, creditors shape policy. When financial institutions become essential infrastructure, their survival becomes a public obligation. These outcomes are not accidents, they are emergent features. The Medici understood this instinctively, long before economists attempted to formalize it. They recognized that political authority without financial backing is fragile and temporary, while financial power, if carefully managed, can operate behind the scenes, free from the risks and constraints of formal rule. Cosimo de' Medici never claimed Florence's highest offices, yet he exercised greater continuity of power than the officials who cycled through them. Lorenzo negotiated with kings as an equal, despite holding no crown. By the time later Medici became dukes and popes, they were merely formalizing authority their family had already possessed in substance for generations. The lesson is as relevant now as it was then. In systems where wealth can be converted into influence, financial power does not merely support political power. Given time, it replaces it. Viewed from the vantage point of 2025, the architecture of global finance would not feel alien to Giovanni di Medici. The scale would astonish him, The speed would defy imagination, and the mathematics would be incomprehensible, but the structure itself would be familiar. Central banks now coordinate policy across borders, shaping currency relationships and credit flows that determine economic conditions for billions. Sovereign debt markets quietly define the limits of political possibility, determining which governments may pursue ambitious policies and which must retreat, not through elections or laws, but through interest rates, capital flight, and credit access. Vast financial institutions exert influence far exceeding their contribution to productive activity, extracting returns by positioning themselves at the choke points of global commerce. As it has throughout history, wealth continues to concentrate upward, accumulating with those who control capital rather than those who supply labor. The machinery has grown more complex, more technical, and more opaque, but its core logic remains unchanged. The Medici would recognize another feature of our moment as well: the instability that emerges when financial power becomes too concentrated and too detached from the real economy. Their bank did not collapse when it was disciplined and cautious, but when ambition overtook restraint, when political goals displaced financial prudence, when lending expanded faster than productive capacity, and when exposure to unreliable sovereign borrowers became excessive. The crisis of 2008 followed the same pattern. Financial institutions grew so large and interconnected that risk could no longer be accurately measured. Debt expanded beyond sustainable limits, and asset values drifted ever further from the underlying economy that was supposed to support them. The collapse was halted, but only by enlarging the system itself, concentrating power further, and deepening its indispensability. In doing so, the foundations were laid for a future crisis even harder to contain. The lesson of the Medici is not a call to nostalgia, nor a belief that financial power can simply be regulated away. It is a warning about structure. These patterns are not accidents or policy failures. They are the predictable outcomes of systems built on credit, leverage, and dependency. As long as economies rely on debt to function, and as long as access to credit remains unequally distributed, financial power will consolidate and reassert itself, regardless of good intentions or democratic ideals. To truly escape this dynamic would require a transformation so profound that it would amount to a different economic order altogether. History suggests such changes rarely emerge from careful planning. They arise instead from breakdown, through crisis, collapse, and reconstruction under new constraints. Until such a rupture occurs, we remain inside a financial architecture whose blueprints were first drafted in Renaissance Florence, refined across centuries, and implemented at planetary scale in the modern era. The house the Medici built is now the house we all inhabit. Their story is not a relic of the past, but the origin story of the present. The moment when financial power was first systematically demonstrated to be more durable than armies, more adaptable than law, and more enduring than political office. Every central banker, every debt manager, every institution deemed systemically important operates in the shadow of Medici innovation, whether they acknowledge it or not. And every citizen who watches public policy constrained by bond markets, who sees governments bend to credit ratings, who observes wealth concentrating upward despite democratic consent, is witnessing the continued operation of patterns first perfected 6 centuries ago. In the counting houses and palaces of Florence, a family of bankers discovered a truth that still governs the modern world. Money, properly deployed, does not merely buy goods and services, it purchases power. Power that survives regimes, outlasts empires, and quietly governs the future.